So Jordan, I was talking to you before and admitted that despite coming from Manchester, I am musically illiterate. I thought Nickelback were a good band until I was informed apparently they're not. So I just want to talk about how you came to know the Sonics and like how did you get involved in this project?
Well, I came to know the Sonics through my father. He introduced them to me when I was around 12 or 13 years old. I was a kid growing up in the Seattle area. In the 90s, you know, I'm sure everyone knows Nirvana, you know, but when you lived there, it was like I had long hair and I dressed like Kurt Cobain. You were, you know, that was kind of your life, you know. So I got really into punk rock music kind of through that. And my dad, him and I weren't very close, but there was this day where he walked by my bedroom and he heard me listening to music and he goes, you should listen to the Sonics. And I thought he was talking about the basketball team, so I just kind of ignored him. And he had found a copy of Boom and gave it to me. And it just like changed my life when I heard it, you know, because when you get into punk rock music, you get really into at least I got really into the history of punk rock, you know, and you learn about the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and the Stooges when you get, that's as far back as you really go. And here I was kind of holding this album, you know, that was before that. And my dad knew about it. It was like, what the fuck is this, you know? So that was kind of the beginning of it for me. And so it was kind of this little secret thing that my father and I kind of bonded over. And when the band announced their reunion, first in, I believe it was '07, and then they played their first show in Seattle in '08. And my dad and I went, and it was the first concert we had gone to together. And the night that we went to the show, it was Halloween night, 2008. At the end of the show, I looked over at whoever I was with my father and I think my sister, and I was like, I'm gonna make a movie about the Sonics. And they were like, oh, another thing Jordan wants to make a movie about that'll probably never come to fruition. So that night I went online and I found a random email that was like management@sonicsboom.com. And I stayed up all night writing this really impassioned email. I'm the guy that needs to make this movie. You know, this is 10 years ago, so I had a full head of hair and I was quite young and ambitious. You know, I hadn't been ground out by the studio system like I have now with the, so I wrote this just, you know, pretty wild email. And I got a response the next day, and it was Buck Ormsby who wrote me back. And Buck is a pretty prominent figure in the movie, and him and I had lunch the next day or a couple days later in Tacoma. And I knew Buck as he was the bass player for the Wailers, and he produced the original 2 Sonics records. So I was excited to meet him, and we sat and we talked. And after that, we kind of shook hands and agreed, like, okay, you're the guy to make this movie. Go get money. And
how did you finance the film?
I didn't.
That's the best answer I've ever had to that question.
Well, that was the thing. You know, my original idea for the film was to make a really big cinematic kind of retelling of the band's history, because I knew that there wasn't any footage that existed of the Sonics from the 60s. And I had this really ambitious idea, and you know, I at the time I was signed at a pretty big agency in Hollywood, and I thought that everything would come together, you know, and it just didn't. And so for years, Buck and I would have these conversations, and I kept paring it down, like, well, maybe not 500,000, maybe 2, you know, and the last ditch effort, we did a crowdsourcing campaign that just failed really poorly. And at that point, I was just kind of depressed and kind of gave up on the film because I didn't know what to do. And I was about to give up on movies entirely when Buck actually passed away. And prior to him passing, I had filmed this really long interview with him because he didn't tell me he was sick, but I could tell. And so when he passed away, all of a sudden the film became something that I had to make. And I had to do. I had to finish. And I moved to Montana because I couldn't afford to live in LA anymore. And I ended up bumping into the guitarist of Pearl Jam,
right.
at a sushi restaurant that I work at today still. And when he walked in, I said, "Oh my God, you're Mike McCready." And he goes, "Yeah." And I was like, "I've been trying to get in touch with you. I'm making this movie about the Sonics." And he loves the Sonics, so he agreed to be in the film. And once his involvement kind of came, to be, it just, everything became real with the other people that I've been trying to reach out to, and it all just sort of happened.
I was going to say, because there's an impressive, even someone like myself who knows nothing about music, because I'm keen to reiterate, the bands and the names you've got appearing in this documentary are really impressive. Is that all down to that one meeting?
Not all down to that one meeting, but it certainly helped. I mean, when he got involved, and he was so open, he was so cool, way cooler than he should have been, running into some random guy in a sushi restaurant in Montana. He literally sat down and was like, "Who else do you want to talk to?" And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "What about Nancy Wilson from Heart?" And I was like, "I would, yes." And he goes, "Let me call her." And it was just, all of a sudden, because for, at that point, 8 years, I had been writing email after email to everybody.
Yeah.
And, when you're writing emails to rock stars' management teams, they just don't write you back.
Of course.
And so all of a sudden, it just, like, legitimized the whole film. And at that point, I had gotten, I think, at least one of the original Sonics, but it created this momentum. And I don't know if it was just personally, because I was so kind of depressed and over the whole thing, that all of a sudden there was this surge to get it done. With or without money, it was like, let's just go do it.
Right.
We need an editor, I'll edit the movie. Like, it was just, Dave Grohl's not available to narrate it, I guess I'll do it. Like, so I just, any obstacle that kind of came, and I was hit with, I just sort of took that on as another thing I was going to do.
Right.
And that was kind of how it was finished.
So I feel this next question's got an obvious answer, but what are you most proud of with the project?
Finishing it was like a parallel to my life in a lot of ways. Like, the shape of the movie was sort of the shape of my life at that time. And, practically homeless, basically sleeping on couches in LA, not getting work, and like the movie was just this broken little thing following me around. And I'm most proud that it's finished.
Right.
And in film festivals, I never thought that I would be here in Manchester with this film. Even just getting invited to this festival was such a surprise and an honor. And all of these festivals that the film has managed to get into so far, it's just been totally shocking, because I've had zero expectations. To get the movie finished, that was really my goal. It wasn't even, I just learned from the years of failed filmmaking, to not have those expectations. So it's been quite a surprise how the reaction's been so far.
And what would you say to filmmakers who might find themselves in a similar situation to where you were? Like, they've got this project and things keep getting in the way of it, and it keeps breaking down.
What would I say?
Yeah. What advice would you offer?
I'm really sorry. The thing with film and the whole movie, industry, I think, is to not have those expectations. To not think that you're going to be, directing some giant movie on the BBC or whatever the hell it is, like right after your first thing. Just, I still have a job at a sushi restaurant in the middle of Montana.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the reality of this business. And I think just keeping yourself in check and not letting yourself get too down, and just stick to your guns and figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, the thing with this movie is, I had a really specific vision for the film, and I basically had to just let that vision die.
Right.
And look at what I had in front of me and go, okay, well, I can't make the movie I want to make. What is the movie I can make? And just make it, like, just allowing myself to back outside, to step outside of that vision is what made this film even possible in the first place. So, yeah, don't have heavy expectations, and be willing to roll with the punches and figure it out.
You've mentioned a couple of times now your initial vision for the project, and how like you learned essentially to roll with the punches, just like you said then. But if you could have, in a magical world where you have an unlimited budget and you can do whatever you want to this film, if there was one change you could make, what would it be?
There's 500 million changes.
But if you only had one.
I honestly don't know how to answer that, because I think one of the things that made this film work, and what I think maybe made it special, is that I wasn't able to do all those things. Right. You know, so sitting back with an audience and kind of watching it now and seeing the things that really do connect with an audience and work in the film, yeah, I think are probably some of the best things in it. So as far as like the one thing I would change, I don't know. I really don't. Sorry.
There's no worries. And how did you first get into making movies then? Because you mentioned before about going to that concert with your dad and your sister and then deciding, I'm going to make a movie about this. So how did you get into the business in the first place?
Well, I had been in the business prior. Yeah. I wrote, directed a feature film when I was like 21 years old.
Oh, wow.
That did the festival circuit and won some awards and got me a decent agent. And then the movie never got picked up.
Right.
So I had sort of gone through some of those rough experiences already, you know. But I mean, I started wanting to make movies when I was about 4 years old, and just never switched. I never wanted to be a firefighter or a police officer. It was just like, I told my mom when I was 4, I'm gonna make movies. And she was like, that's cute. And then I just always wanted to make movies. And so, you know, when I was 9, 10, 11 years old, we would like steal the neighbor's video camera and start to shoot stuff. And so I mean, I've literally been doing it since I could. Right. You know.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, you know, you bonded with your dad essentially over the Sonics. Yeah. And it must have been a very, I don't know, committing something so personal to you and your father to Celluloid. It must have been quite the commitment. Did you have any reservations going into that?
Yeah. Anyone who knows me, you know, would tell you that like this is a very uncomfortable scenario for me. I'm not a big fan of being in front of crowds. The last thing I would ever do is put myself in a movie or in front of a camera, period. Mm. And making that choice, it was just another one of those things. I had to make the movie that I could make. Right. And that was, you know, the story of my father and I is in the movie and is a part of the narrative of the film. And that really came about from just conversations that I'd had with people over the years who would ask me, like, why are you still trying to make this movie about the Sonics? Like, yeah. Like give up, dude. It's just, it's killing you, you know? And I would always tell them the story about how, you know, my father and I really bonded over that band. And that's one of those things about music that I think is so unique and special, how it can just unify everyone in a room without, you know, having anything in common. And that was always the thing when I would talk to people about this film, where I could tell that it was like, oh, I can relate to that. Whether or not I like the Sonics or not, like that's a story that I can respond to and relate to. But making that choice to put it actually in the film was very, very difficult. Yeah. Yeah. It took a lot of alcohol before I sat in front of the microphone to record the first bit of narration.
Sorry, I was just having a beer then. You mentioned alcohol and I remembered. Okay, I think we've hit on this a little bit now, but I think we are running out of time. Are we, Rob? A couple more, brilliant, still got a bit more time. You can tell we're really slick, can't you? Because I have to keep saying, Rob, what's the time? Anyway, do you have any major cinematic influences then on this particular film, or is it just a personal story?
You know, I never even was that interested in documentary filmmaking.
So your first feature then, was that just a...
Yeah, it was a narrative drama about some kids in high school. And that, you know, that's really what my interest, where it comes from. You know, I'm a storyteller, and I've always been obsessed with telling stories. And I've always loved documentaries, but I never had wanted to make one before this film. So as far as like influences, it's really hard to say. You know, there are so many, you know, I'm a big fan of David Fincher, like, you know, things like that. But when you watch this movie, it wouldn't really make any sense. But that's what I come from. You know, I love all cinema. I've got a Clockwork Orange tattooed on my back, and you know, I'm a big kind of cinephile. So with this, it was more of just It's so hard to say, 'cause I was really just trying to figure out what the hell I could do.
Okay.
And there wasn't any like time to allow influences to come into it, you know?
Right. So 2 final questions then. The first one, can I see your tattoo?
No.
I expected that. And the second one, you mentioned becoming quite despondent with the idea of filmmaking until you sort of, got back to work on this and managed to finish it. Are you planning on making any more films?
Yeah, I mean, that's the plan. I mean, I'm going to be trying to make movies until the day I die, whether or not anyone wants to help me by financing them or not, I have no idea. But yeah, I've got a handful of projects that are pretty close. A movie called Bastards of Young that I've been working on for years with one of my closest friends, Taylor Hanley. That may be happening here pretty soon. And I've also started writing a film about the Sonics.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I felt like I wasn't able to really nail with this documentary, because there isn't any footage of them from back in the day, is how young they were.
Right.
So, I mean, they were 17, 18, 19 years old when this was happening. It was such a brief moment in their time. And I've been kind of working on a film to kind of follow them around at that time. So I'm going to be working on the Sonic shit for forever, apparently. But yeah, there's quite a few projects I'm hopefully getting going.